It is a dark and stormy night, because this show is set in space, and that means we're allowed to use clichés. Quark's meeting with a Bajoran woman who's telling him she didn't kill her husband, which is the sort of statement that raises a lot of questions. Quark doesn't care about them, he's here on business, something they've conducted before during the occupation, with a bit of smuggling from the sounds of it. This time she wants him to fetch a box from the station. It's in the store her husband used to run before his murder, and she says the terrible memories are why she doesn't want to fetch it herself. Quark thinks it might be more to do with Odo suspecting her of murder, but it's all the same to him. 5 bars of latinum is 5 bars of latinum, and he says he'll be back in a day or two. As he leaves, an unknown man comes out of the shadows, all the better to be illuminated by lightning, just so we know he's a wrong-un. To the station we go for a touch of casual burglary, though I suppose it technically isn't if she inherited. Quark's taking Rom to help out, only for him to essentially take over the job. Rom's become a dab hand at breaking security. He does it all the time in the bar when Quark's not around. Quark decides his own security concerns can wait until the job is over, and we go back to his bar with the loot. Just delivering the box would be the safer choice, but perhaps not the most profitable one. The only way to be sure is to open it, so he does, and on discovering only a list of names, sends Rom off for a camera so he can make a copy. It would seem Quark's curiosity was entirely expected by his client, which is why he was followed back here by Lightning Wrongen. He at least has the courtesy to apologize for what he's doing before he poops some yellow on Quark and kills him. Rom's quick at raising the alarm, and Bashir's already trying to save Quark when Sisko appears. Bashir asks for an anti-grav lift, which is curious when he's the one who told us they don't work on the station only 2 episodes ago, but let's ignore that for now. Maybe he's too busy to remember. After all, we can't expect him to be superhuman. Kira's set up checkpoints at airlocks, but isn't sure it was quick enough. Whoever did it could already be on a ship, so Sisko orders everything to be held. We need more data, and Rom's not very forthcoming. Odo knows he's holding back, so he and Sisko play good cop, bad cop by suggesting he might have done it until he spills his guts. He doesn't know the client, though, only that it was someone from Bajor, and the box had been here since the Cardigans were in charge. Odo discovering that it came from the site of an old murder makes him significantly more interested, and back in time we viewers go to learn more about the past firsthand. We're in the evil times of the Cardigan occupation, and we know it's bad because the gaffer is using blue light bulbs. Odo, mimicking slightly more complicated clothes than we're used to, is being brought to Gul Dukat, who's currently at the scene of a crime. After a bit of preamble about having seen Odo before when he was still a curiosity in a Bajoran lab, Gul Dukat says he thinks Odo's particular skill set would make him a good copper. That and the Bajorans here seem to view him as a neutral third party, a bit like a shape-shifting Switzerland. Odo's not particularly interested in working for the Cardigans, but Dukat explains it's not quite the same thing. Besides, the alternative to finding out who actually committed this murder would just be executing some random Bajorans, and that doesn't help anyone. That's why Odo ends up talking to a woman we recognise from the start of the show. She's in somewhat less finery this time, but life's not that hard for her, as we learn she and her husband had their own private quarters, something rare for the workers here. Anywho, she thinks she knows who murdered her husband, and tells Odo about an affair he was having. He broke it off and confessed everything to her, so she thinks this spurned lover killed him for it. Odd thing, though, Odo's good with details, and he notices the skin around our new widow's eyes shows she hasn't shed a single tear despite the very recent death of her loving, if somewhat flawed, husband. She puts it down to anger and shock, arguably after realizing she couldn't bluff it, and Odo lets it go. Maybe he thinks he can learn more from this alleged lover, which is handy as the widow is able to point her out. She's the one over there who looks a lot like Kira Nerys. The Kira of today's had no choice but to start letting ships leave, so it looks like Quark's murderer is gone. Probably just as well, really, as he might have tried again if he'd learned that Quark was still alive. I guess the impossible anti-grav gurney must have made all the difference. That's a source of mixed emotion for Rom, but he doesn't have the time to process it right now. Odo's trying to get him to remember the names on that sheet of paper. A little prompting manages to get something, though whether it's a name or his imagination is another matter. He passes the name on to Kira to see if she recognizes it given her involvement in prior events here, and those prior events nearly resulted in Kira getting strung up from the sounds of things until Odo proved her innocent. Back in time we go again to learn a little more. Odo sits down next to Kira as she's eating, and a compliment to try and start a conversation makes her assume he's after something else. As he's fumbling his way through an apology, she clocks him as security of a sort, and he explains what he's doing. Kira has a slightly different story to the widow. She says there was absolutely nothing between she and the dead guy, though he may have been interested. She only knew him because he could get hold of ginger tea, and she was buying it from him. Quite how she had the money to do that when she goes on to say she's here looking for work is a question that doesn't seem to occur to Odo. At least that's what she says she was doing last night when the guy got murderized, claiming she was in Quark's bar asking for a job. He makes it clear trying to leave the station would be unwise, and she makes it clear that regardless of whatever distinction he's making in his head, he's still working for the Cardigans, and that's something he needs to have a good long think about. Back in the present, Odo's decided on a visit to Bajor. The chemist's widow claims to know nothing about a list, and points out that Odo can't be sure it wasn't put there by a Cardigan. They've certainly got form on leaving things to sow discord after the file on Kira we found last season. That doesn't work, though, as Odo knows someone on the planet asked Quark for it. The widow does a great job at hiding her concern when she learns Quark's still alive, perhaps having put in some practice since the last time she met Odo. And she says she doesn't recognize the name Rom gave, either. There is one curious thing, though. Her power was cut off recently. She implied it was a fault when Quark was visiting earlier, but Odo did a little checking and found she was in debt to them. A debt that was cleared up this morning. She claims a loan from a friend and refuses to share the name over concerns that this friend's wife might not approve. Back to the station we go. Quark's still alive, though Bashir's out of treatment ideas, so whether he lives or dies will depend on how much he doesn't want Rom to inherit the bar. Kira's news is a mixed bag too. She's managed to find the guy Rom named, despite him being a few letters off, and thinks there's a connection as he came to the station regularly. Unfortunately, someone else found him first, which is why he was face down in a pond. Odo thinks this is on him for sharing the name with the widow, and is determined that it won't happen again. That's why Quark's getting an armed guard at all times. To the past once more to see Odo and Quark meeting for the first time. He's checking on Kira's alibi, and Quark confirms it. He also makes the mistake of trying to imply something happened between them in exchange for the job, so Odo knows he's bullshitting. Getting a bit handsy makes Quark more inclined to share the truth. After all, getting paid to give someone an alibi isn't worth a beating. All of which is overheard by Dukat, who's suitably impressed with Odo's skills. Maybe that's why he lets Odo get away with standing up to him when he tries to force a name. Odo will share that when he's personally convinced of guilt, and not before. Odo has the list of names, not from the paper and not from Rom's questionable memory, but from the 8 people that our widow has been in furious contact with over the last 52 hours. They're people she's never spoken to before, yet each of them decided to transfer significant sums of money to her. I guess they could all be loans, though Odo thinks the more obvious explanation is the correct one, especially when you start asking yourself how a handful of people managed to come out of a brutal occupation with cash to spare. That's why Odo wants to bring the widow here to explain things herself. That's assuming Lightning Rongan, who either didn't scarper before or has come back, and doesn't have something to say about it. Back in the past, Odo's looking for more explanations, only this time from Kira. She admits the alibi was fake, but still maintains she didn't kill the guy. She couldn't have. She was busy sabotaging a piece of machinery for the underground when he was murdered. Not wanting to share that particular piece of data is quite understandable. Dukat won't give a shit about a Bajoran murder if he can nail a member of the Resistance to the wall instead. Speak of the devil, Dukat's just turned up and wants to know if this is the person he wants, all of which leaves Odo with a choice. Except it doesn't, of course. Odo's task was finding a murderer, and he now has an excellent reason to tell Dukat that it wasn't Kira. The rest is really none of his business. Back to the present, and we find Lightning Rongan is bringing Quark flowers. Maybe he's sorry for what happened. Stabbing the guy who refuses to let him in is a funny way of showing his remorse, and I'd argue sticking a pillow over Quark's face sends mixed messages too. A visit from Rom ends in a bit of screaming and wrestling, Odo turning up just as Lightning Rongan tries to scarp her. Rom's briefly pleased at learning he saved Quark's life, until he realizes that means he's lost the bar yet again. Widow claims to have never seen the guy before, which is odd considering the records of them calling each other very recently, that and the large wedge of currency she transferred to him a couple of days back. She's smart enough to decide now's a good time for a lawyer. She also still claims to Odo that she didn't kill her husband, but she needn't have bothered. He already knows she didn't do it, because he's figured out who did. The clues are all there, of course. The list must be of people collaborating with the Cardigans during the occupation, and the murdered guy had it because he was the link to Ducat. Why else would he and his wife have been given preferential treatment with private quarters? That probably also explains why nothing was ever done about the black market he was engaged in. Ducat might even have been taking a cut. And this knowledge also gives us a motive, too. A high-level collaborator would be a target for the underground. Kira being able to connect the name Rom gave us despite the error was what made Odo suspect her, assuming it was a name already known to her in the Resistance. She admits the sabotage machinery she used for her alibi was someone else, though says she wasn't there for an assassination. She was just looking for the list when he came in. These things happen. That she couldn't tell him at the time is understandable, but there's been a whole year since. She wanted to, but was afraid of what he'd think, and will leave them to work out for themselves what this means for their trust, until the next adventure. A good old-fashioned murder mystery, and one that manages to keep it interesting until the end. Well played all. I could probably have done without Odo's film noir private detective logs myself, as they felt a touch forced and out of character, but they're not offensive enough to ruin it, so we'll let it go. It's also a sizable chunk of backstory too, giving us Odo's first meetings with Quark and Kira. It technically isn't Ducat's, but essentially serves the same purpose. And what we learn about past Odo is that he was even more awkward and stilted in his mannerisms than he is now. That's not a fair thing, as we see him stand up to Ducat, but presumably a lack of confidence born of unfamiliarity with humanoids. His first fumbled introduction with Kira, saying a pretty girl shouldn't be eating alone, reeks of him parroting something he's heard rather than understanding the connotations of it. And he looks down a lot more, avoiding eye contact with people. This may all feel familiar to those of us with spicy brains. He knows there are social rules, this unwritten pact that everybody has agreed to abide by, but he can't quite see how it all fits together or what the purpose is. Assuming his eyes work in the same way as ours, it's also possible he avoids eye contact for some of the same reasons too. The body language and demeanour of the person he's speaking to might be a distraction or overstimulation, things that he doesn't quite understand, taking chunks out of his attention, so looking somewhere else might be to aid focus. Or maybe I'm just projecting. It's not the first time I've seen parallels to neurodivergence in Trek, and it would be hubris to assume they were all real. Let's move on to a question, shall we? Was the murdered guy a drug dealer? Some of you might be reeling at that idea and wonder if I just pulled it out of my arse, so let me explain. We're told he worked in a chemist shop, all sufficiently above board, but when Odo's asked if he's visited, he replies, "I don't use chemicals." We could put that down to a simple statement of fact, of course, as it's possible there's no metabolism for chemicals to affect. It's a curious way of phrasing it, though, if the usage was innocent, not "I don't use medicine" or "I have no need." Could he really have been around such unpleasant conditions for any length of time and not understand the implications of the term chemical use? Such a conclusion would also tie in with the black market dealings we suspect the murdered guy had, Quark having been implied as his source of ginger tea. And if he was working for Ducat, then a method of chemically controlling the workforce might be a desirable outcome, even before you consider the bonus of Ducat skimming a few strips off the top for his retirement fund. We'll end on another question, and one that's more pertinent, even if it is just as difficult to answer. Would Odo have handed Kira over if he knew she was the murderer? We know that Odo cares less for rules than what he thinks is right, and Kira's cause was arguably far more just given the involvement of the Resistance and knowing the victim was a traitor. His reaction to the thought of collaborators in the present shows he has little time for them. The problem is, that runs up against Odo's word. He told Ducat that he'd give a name, and Odo doesn't strike me as someone who would go against his word on a whim, regardless of who it was given to. I think he's somebody who understands that if your moral compass is dictated by the actions of those around you, then it was never really a moral compass. It was just an excuse. So which would have given out first, his sense of justice or personal honour? Honestly, I'm not sure either way, but I do know he would have struggled with the aftermath of either. End of episode. I was so far from home, a stranger here, looking for a friendly face, but finding only bare metal walls. Standing there so alone, feeling queer. An avalanche of stomping boots comes running at us from down the hall. You came from out of nowhere, soldiers filled the dock. I was so scared and I'm sorry I bit your cock. I just couldn't find the words, so afraid. Surrounded by guys with guns all shouting at me aggressively. One slipped over on me turds, and there he stayed. Well, that's when the shooting starts, with me in the eye of a cacophony. What were you expecting? Or are you just thick? Even though it's your fault, I'm sorry I bit your dick. If violence you yearn, then soon it is your turn. It was your time to learn that it is not cool to be cruel, so I bit your tool. You're the one who was aggressive. What you did was wrong. You got what you deserve, but I'm sorry I bit your dong.